want to tell you a story of two recipes. The first recipe is for global transformation on a mass scale. And the second one is, how do you make living concrete? So the first recipe is take every building in the world and add a generous dollop of love and compassion, and then use the strategy farther, faster, together. So I work for the Carbon Leadership Forum at the University of Washington, and our mission is to create a collective impact initiative that spans the entire global building industry to rapidly and radically reduce all embodied carbon emissions from building construction materials. Why is this important? Because in the next 30 to 40 years, the human race will be building another 2 trillion square feet of building space. What does that mean? Consider building one entirely new New York City, all 5 boroughs, every 30 days for 30 years. Consider that a lot of those buildings will be made up of concrete and steel and wood and insulation and glass. All of that has a carbon footprint to manufacture, and it's called embodied carbon. %40 of all greenhouse gas emissions come from buildings, from operating buildings, from building materials. And over the last 25 years, we've developed an amazing green building movement that has catalyzed action across the world to understand how do we build buildings that are net zero carbon in their operations, so operational carbon. But until very recently, most folks in the building industry had never even heard of embodied carbon or thought about embodied carbon as a component of the larger carbon problem. So that's what's beginning to shift very, very rapidly right this minute. It's shifting because for the first time people are understanding, wait a minute, 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions, all of that from buildings, about half of that comes from operational carbon, just running buildings, heating and cooling and running buildings. About half of that going forward for new buildings will be embodied carbon, connected with concrete and steel and all of the different building materials that we use. So how do you address this? There are hundreds of thousands, actually millions of people, architects and engineers and workers and construction companies and materials companies that are part of this global infrastructure, the largest industry on the planet Earth. And our sense is that all of those millions of people have in them the dream of a world that is sustainable and healthy and beautiful. And what can we do to awaken that dream and to engage all of that audience, all of those participants, all of those actors, all of those activists in an effort to recreate the way that we imagine buildings on Earth? How do we do that? Well, think about 25 years from now. We will have a net zero carbon built environment. It is conceivable, not just conceivable, it's possible, because right this minute on the planet Earth, we know everything that we need to know. We have every potential solution that we need to make every single building on Earth a net zero carbon building. Right this minute. That's going to be hard, but we know how to do it. We know what the solutions, the technologies, the products need to be. Embodied carbon is perhaps a tougher challenge because we're just starting to get it. We're just starting to understand even how to do it. 3 months ago, the Carbon Leadership Forum released a software tool called the Embodied Carbon in Construction Calculator. It depends on everybody in the building industry who's selling materials to publish an environmental product declaration, third-party verified, scientifically valid, that demonstrates, oh, here's the carbon footprint of the building material that I want to sell. And a construction calculator then allows you to compare all of the different suppliers, all of the different places that those materials come from, and to understand if I make that choice instead of that choice, I'll be radically reducing the carbon footprint of my new building. This is a transformative moment in human history. It's never been possible. Now we can do it. So the final story that I want to tell you is that about a brand new form of living concrete that we all just heard about 1 week ago today. There's an article in the New York Times, look it up, living concrete. It was about a scientist, a material scientist named Will Schruber, who's a teacher and professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder. He's incredibly interested in how do we make concrete that has a very low to negative carbon footprint. Why is that important? Because every time you manufacture 1 ton of cement, you're releasing 1 ton of CO2 into the atmosphere using the traditional process of Portland cement. 1 ton of CO2. That amounts to 5% of all greenhouse gas emissions just for cement alone. So this new cement, though, it's not new cement, it's actually new concrete. The new concrete, you get a form that's shaped like a concrete block, and into that form you put a recipe of materials. You put a cyanobacteria, that's a form of microbe that actually collects energy through photosynthesis, and in the process creates calcium carbonate that actually cements particles of sand and gravel together. So you've got the bacteria, and then you add a little bit of warm water, and then you add some nutrients, and you add some sand of any kind. It doesn't have to be perfectly or pure sand, just any kind of sand. And then you add a little bit of ordinary household gelatin that you can buy at the store. And what you end up with in a day, you've got living concrete that you can build stuff out of. Not only that, but you could take this concrete block and divide it into 10 pieces and put each one in a vat with some more water, a little bit of sand and gravel, and a little bit of nutrients, and new concrete blocks will grow. So notice that this process of photosynthesis is identical to the way that trees attract and absorb carbon dioxide. We can build buildings that are part of the living earth themselves and that help us transform buildings from an existential threat into an extraordinary opportunity for revitalizing the global economy and human communities. What do we need? We need to, first of all, we need to stop tearing down buildings. When we think that they're perhaps at the end of their useful life, we can, instead of tearing down a building, recreate it. Use all of that embodied carbon to create a new building that is beautiful and useful and delightful to be in. Secondly, we need to develop a whole slew of amazing new materials that can replace or radically transform the building materials that we use right now. We need to sequester gigatons, billions of tons of carbon in buildings, in those New York cities that we're building every 30 days. And finally, this is going to be hard. It's going to be really hard, so we need a little bit of help from new policies, new building codes, new requirements that people step in to building new kinds of buildings that can help the human race recreate our capacity to sustainably live